The keyboard I'm looking at today might look like your average gaming keyboard, but it's actually a world's first. This is actually the Ducky One X, the world's first gaming keyboard with induction switches. Yes, that's the same technology as your friend's fancy stovetop, but here's the surprising thing. You don't really need it. Standard slab of switches or something more? Well, from the surface, it looks like a pretty traditional gaming keyboard. So it either comes in a full-size version, like the one I've got here, or 60%, which is, a lot smaller. I like a number pad, so this one works pretty great for me. It also comes in either white or black. I've gone for white because it stands out. It looks pretty good. It comes with media keys on the top. You've got your volume controls and you've got a button that quickly opens your calculator. It's also wireless and it comes with 2.4 gigahertz dongle and Bluetooth, and you can connect it over a Type-C cable, and there's one included in the box. The keycaps are PBT, so they should last a little while, and it comes in this lovely OEM profile. Altogether, it's a pretty nice looking thing, but not unusual for a Ducky keyboard. It's priced at $179 or £180, which is actually a pretty good deal for a full-size keyboard with all the trimmings. The price per key is actually, let me figure this out, $1.64 per key. I've been comparing it to the Wooting 80HE, which is a smaller keyboard, doesn't have a numpad, and costs a bit more money. Then there's the smaller 60% version, which is $139 or £140, and that works out something like $2.27 per key, which is a lot higher. I'm not really sure why that's the case with small keyboards. They always cost materially more for materially less stuff. But there we go. Anyway, let's talk about what makes this keyboard special and earns it that world's first title. Ducky's induction switch, say that 3 times fast, is its answer to a Hall effect switch, which you might have already heard of if you're a competitive gamer, but if you haven't, here's a brief explainer of how those work. A normal keyboard switch is just on or off, like 1 or 0. You depress the key, contact is made, and then a signal is sent. And then when you release the key, a reset point is hit, and then the signal ceases. A Hall effect switch is a little different. It can measure the entire range of a key press using magnets or magic, either or. With a Hall effect switch, a user can shift the actuation, add more than one actuation point, or move the reset point on the fly. Well, here's Ducky's new induction switch. When you depress the switch, the conductor is going through the electromagnetic field generated by coils on the PCB. Well, what does all this newfangled keyboard technology get you then? Well, let's go through it. Adjustable actuation, for one, from 3.5mm down to 0.1mm. 3.5mm requires smashing the keys to register any sort of key press, while 0.1mm is so sensitive you'll make all the typos in the world, but it'll be blisteringly quick in game. Rapid trigger means a key can be reset whenever it's released, which allows you to press the key again sooner. It's a pretty useful thing to turn on, and you can leave it on without really any downsides whatsoever. Multi-point trigger allows you to set a key to trigger different input at various points in the key press. For example, press the W key lightly and your character walks forward. But with multi-point trigger, you could also have it so that when you press the key all the way down, your character runs. And it's not using some clever analog input like some keyboards like Wooting offer. It's actually just putting the W key on the certain amount of the travel, and then the bottom of the travel is adding the shift key. So, it all works in pretty much any game and is pretty smart. But you should know that none of this is exclusive to induction keyboards. Hall effect keyboards can do this too, and often, I dare say, do it better. Back when I first saw this gaming keyboard at Computex 2024, when Ducky unveiled it, they were promising pretty good battery life out of it, and it was going to have better battery life because induction used less power than Hall effect. So I tested Ducky's gaming keyboard, the One X, and I was finding that I was having to charge it up quite a lot. And I measured the amount of time that it took for it to go from full charge to no charge, which was pretty easy using a cool little shortcut, Function B, on the keyboard. And I found that after about 11 hours, 11 and a half, the keyboard would be dead. So then I asked Ducky, and they said, yeah, it's about 11 hours with RGB enabled, or something like 34 with RGB disabled. It's not that induction switches are bad, but they were kind of promised as a way of having Hall effect, but with a good battery life. Unfortunately, it doesn't really feel like those benefits have really materialized, and actually, they're just quite a lot like Hall effect switches, but, cool little prongs. The other thing I've struggled with is the software. So this is Ducky software, the Ducky Hub. It's a browser app, which means you connect to it through Chromium browsers, fortunately not Firefox. And then if you connect your keyboard via USB to your computer, you can connect it as a device in this app and then control everything you need. So this first page is the key settings page, which allows you to swap keys in and also adjust the function layer. Then you have lighting, which is fairly self-explanatory, and the actuation setting, which is probably the first thing you want to tweak when you actually get this board. Then you have multi-point trigger, which is quite an interesting setting because it allows you to have a key act as 2 different actions, or actually 4 different actions. Once you have these set up, you have to save them, and you have to go into key settings, and then go into the macro MPT, which stands for multi-point trigger, and you have to drag these in. So that now replaces my W key. So it's a little bit tricky because you don't get actually told how to do much. And the other thing that's really missing from this application are profiles. Now compare that to the Wooting Wootility and the actual Wooting ATHE that I've got to compare against. And that has a mode button that allows you to swap between profiles really easily. And the lack of profiles on Ducky's board is probably its biggest weakness. So if you have, say, multi-point trigger set up with W and left shift, when I press W, it walks, and when I press it further down, I run. But when I'm not gaming anymore and I want to just be typing on this keyboard, same applies, because that's still set in here, and I'd have to go in every time I start typing after I'm done gaming and get rid of this and replace it with the W key. Otherwise, whenever I type W, if I press it too far, it's going to be capitalized, and it makes for some very angry sounding emails. It's kind of a bit awkward because the whole point of buying this board is that you get all of this adjustable actuation, but then you can't use every single bit of it all the time. You have to kind of go for some sort of in-between that's not quite as good for gaming and not quite as good for typing. Now, I've spoken to Ducky about this, and they say they're looking into profiles, but there's no timeline. I'm not sure when that's going to happen, and it does feel like a real miss for this keyboard. I do think it's worth noting that the typing experience on the Ducky One X is fantastic. The stabilizers are rock solid, and the switches are super stable, and there's no rattle to them whatsoever. They're also pre-lubed, so it just sounds lovely, and it's really smooth and just very pleasant to type on in general. Though I do have a few issues with the keys beyond how nice they are to use. And the first one is, it's a hot swappable keyboard, but you can only replace a switch with another Ducky induction switch. I mean, it's a world's first. There aren't many of these switches around. That's kind of the whole point, right? So when you're replacing switch for switch, you're really only going to do it when one switch is broken. And that would be fine if Ducky included any spares in the box. Unfortunately, they don't. So if you get a broken one, you're going to have to try and source another one of these. Now, speaking of removing the switches from the keyboard, it's actually really easy. And this brings me on to point number 2 of why I'm not too fussed on these switches. You can just do this and yeah, the whole switch came out. And that makes me slightly worried, not for the longevity of the switch itself, which seems pretty solid. The issue is this plastic housing. And if all of these clips were to kind of wear down or break off, you only need one of these switches to break off and no longer fit snugly into the keyboard for your whole keyboard to be a write-off, unless you can get another one. And like, sure, maybe you can get another one from Ducky, but I just feel like it's a bit of a flaw, and I just wish there were 3, 4, maybe 5 switches included in the box. And it's not just the escape key either. I could pick any one of these keys. If you just pull it slightly to the side, it comes out. I can see why a gaming keyboard company like Ducky feels the need to waddle into the competitive gaming keyboard space. I mean, there are so many Hall Effect keyboards out there, and they're super popular and only gaining popularity. And Ducky offers a competitively priced keyboard versus all of them at $179. So if you want a numpad, Ducky's got you covered. I'm just not sold on it. Unlike purely mechanical keyboards, the software really matters for a competitive, clever keyboard such as this. Where it was mostly just about controlling RGB lighting and maybe a few macros, now the software unlocks all the most important settings. Without good software, you lose out on a lot of what makes a Hall Effect or an induction keyboard special. Unfortunately, that's just where I am with the Ducky One X. The software just isn't up to par with the alternatives on the market. Personally, I rate Wooting's Wootility as the best on the market, and the difference between these two software packages is night and day. Ducky's is lacking in that same fluidity that you can jump between modes and profiles. You just can't really do that on the One X. That's not to say the Ducky One X isn't good in some ways. It absolutely is. But Ducky needs to put more work into the software to help it stand out from the crowd. Unfortunately, induction switches alone, it's just not enough. If you've liked this video, then give me a like and subscribe and all that stuff, but also let me know in the comments your favorite rapid trigger keyboard. I'm sure some people would like to have some recommendations, because there's a lot out there. Thanks for watching.